At the height of America's Gilded Age, wealth was supposed to last forever. But on a lonely hill above California's coast stands a mansion that tells a different story. It was not built to fail, it was built to prove permanence. Yet stone by stone, this estate began to do something unexpected. It didn't secure power, it exposed its limits. This is not a story about luxury. It is a story about how unlimited wealth, when left unchecked, quietly turns into a liability. By the time the construction slowed, the damage was already irreversible. This mansion did not just consume money, it revealed the illusion at the heart of America's Gilded Age. In the rugged folds of California's central coast, where the Santa Lucia Mountains rise abruptly from the Pacific, stands a monument to ambition that defies the isolation of its setting. Hearst Castle, perched atop a hill once known simply as Camp Hill, commands a view that stretches across vast ranch lands to the ocean horizon, a landscape purchased in 1865 by George Hearst, with fortunes drawn from the silver mines of the Comstock Lode. This estate, expanded to 250,000 acres under his son William Randolph Hearst, became the canvas for a vision that blended European grandeur with American scale. Its architecture a deliberate echo of Renaissance palaces and medieval fortresses, symbolizing not just wealth, but an assertion of cultural dominion over the untamed West. The main structure, Casa Grande, rises with twin bell towers modeled after the Church of Santa Maria la Mayor in Ronda, Spain, their spires piercing the sky as if to claim authority over the elements themselves, while the façade, clad in pale manti stone from Utah, gleams under the relentless coastal sun, evoking the immutable presence of ancient cathedrals transported across oceans. Within this framework, architect Julia Morgan orchestrated a symphony of styles. Spanish colonial revival merging with Mediterranean influences, where concrete reinforced with steel forms, the hidden skeleton allowing for expansive rooms that flow into one another, creating a spatial hierarchy that places Hearst at its apex, his private Gothic suite on the third floor overlooking the assembly hall below, a chamber lined with 15th century tapestries, and a ceiling from a Spanish monastery, where decisions of empire could be made in seclusion amid artifacts of bygone eras. The castle's layout enforces a subtle yet profound sense of spatial authority, with guest houses, Casa del Mar, Casa del Monte, and Casa del Sol, arrayed along the esplanade like sentinels flanking the central palace, each descending in terraced steps down the hillside, their designs drawing from Moorish and Persian motifs with intricate tiles and arched doorways that guide visitors upward toward the heart of power. Guests arriving by private airstrip or along the winding 5-mile road from the Pacific Highway would ascend through manicured gardens spanning 127 acres, passing pergolas draped in wisteria, and fountains fed by reservoirs engineered to defy the arid terrain, until reaching the Neptune Pool, an outdoor expanse of 345,000 gallons rebuilt 3 times at Hearst's insistence, its Grecian columns and statuary from Italian marble, framing a vista that blurs the line between man-made opulence and natural majesty. This progression was no accident. It mirrored the social ascent Hearst himself had navigated, born in 1863. To a father whose Gilded Age mining wealth had catapulted the family from modest origins, to the pinnacles of San Francisco society, where illusions of perpetual prosperity masked the volatility of speculative fortunes. The historical atmosphere envelops one in layers of time, as if the air itself carries whispers from the 1920s gatherings, where Hollywood luminaries like Charlie Chaplin and political figures such as Winston Churchill mingled in the refectory, a Gothic hall with choir stalls from a 15th century Spanish cathedral, and banners fluttering under a Renaissance ceiling, the room's long oak table set for formal dinners. That blended informality, paper napkins amid silver service, with the weight of collected history, including Greek vases dating to 740 BC, and Flemish paintings that Hearst acquired during Europe's interwar upheavals. Yet beneath this immersive tapestry of art and architecture lay the seeds of financial unraveling as Hearst's relentless expansions. From the indoor Roman pool with its Venetian glass mosaics, to the private zoo that once housed zebras and giraffes roaming the grounds, reflected the Gilded Age ethos inherited from his father's era. a period of unchecked industrial growth, where tycoons like the Vanderbilts and Rockefellers built mansions as testaments to their invincibility only for economic tides. To expose the fragility of such illusions, Hearst, who inherited the ranch in 1919 upon his mother's death, poured resources into this project amid the Roaring '20s, when his media empire spanned nearly 30 newspapers and magazines, generating revenues that seemed inexhaustible. Yet the castle's construction, beginning with modest bungalows and evolving into a 90,000 square foot complex, demanded constant infusions of capital, with costs for buildings alone nearing $5 million by the 1930s, not including the millions spent on antiquities shipped from dismantled monasteries and palaces across Spain and Italy. The atmosphere, calm and enveloping during those peak years, held a humanistic undercurrent in the workers' stories. Carpenters who aged wood to match centuries-old beams, engineers who harnessed distant springs to supply water, revealing the human labor that sustained this dream even as the Great Depression loomed, casting shadows over the sunlit terraces, where Hearst dictated editorials via teletype from his celestial suite, oblivious at first to the mounting debts. That would force asset liquidations and halt building in 1937. The foundations of Hearst's financial empire, much like the castle's reinforced concrete underpinnings, trace back to the speculative booms of the 19th century, where his father George parlayed a $450 investment in the Uffer mine into a stake worth millions, funding political ventures that saw him elected to the U.S. Senate in 1887, all while instilling in his son a belief in the boundless potential of American enterprise. William Randolph Hearst, educated at Harvard but expelled for pranks involving chamber pots gifted to professors, channeled this inheritance into journalism, acquiring the San Francisco Examiner in 1887 at age 23. With his father's backing, transforming it into a sensationalist powerhouse that championed yellow journalism, its headlines inflating the Spanish-American War tensions in 1898 with fabricated stories of Spanish atrocities, a tactic that boosted circulation to unprecedented levels, and expanded his holdings to include the New York Journal, where circulation wars with Joseph Pulitzer escalated into a frenzy of hyperbole and illustrations that captivated the urban masses. This media dominance peaking in the 1920s with ownership of 28 major newspapers, reaching 1 in 4 American households, generated annual revenues exceeding $100 million, allowing Hearst to indulge in collecting art and antiquities. On a scale rivaling European monarchs shipping entire rooms from dismantled Spanish castles to San Simeon, where Julia Morgan integrated them into the evolving design, her blueprints adapting to Hearst's whims, such as relocating the assembly room's fireplace from a French chateau, after it arrived mismatched in scale. As construction progressed through the 1920s, the castle became a nexus of cultural and political influence, its guest list reading like a roster of the era's elite. Writers like George Bernard Shaw debating in the library. Amid 10,000 volumes, actresses such as Marion Davies, Hearst's longtime companion, hosting poolside soirees at the Neptune Pool, where alabaster lamps from ancient Egyptian temples cast ethereal glows over midnight swims, and aviators like Charles Lindbergh landing on the private airstrip to discuss transatlantic feats over breakfast. In the Della Robbia room, its walls adorned with 16th century Italian Majolica plates. Yet this immersion in luxury masked the humanistic strains on those who built and maintained it, with Morgan, the first woman licensed as an architect in California, overseeing a workforce of up to 80 craftsmen during peak seasons, many drawn from San Francisco's immigrant communities, their skills in stone masonry and ironwork, forging the estate's details from the hand-carved teak ceilings imported from the Philippines to the Persian rugs that softened the marble floors, all while Hearst's telegrams demanded revisions. That extended timelines and inflated budgets, a pattern echoing the Gilded Age's broader illusions of inexhaustible wealth where industrial magnates erected Newport mansions, only to see them shuttered amid tax burdens and shifting fortunes. The atmosphere during these gatherings carried a calm undercurrent of transience as conversations in the Gothic study surrounded by medieval manuscripts, and a desk from a Florentine palazzo often turned to the stock market's euphoria oblivious to the speculative bubbles. Inflating across Wall Street, where Hearst's own investments in real estate and mining mirrored his father's risks, but now amplified by leveraged loans from banks. Enamored with his media clout, by the late 1920s, cracks in this facade began to emerge as Hearst's expenditures on San Simeon, totaling over $10 million for construction and collections by 1929, coincided with his failed political ambitions, including a disastrous 1906 run for New York governor, and earlier bids for the presidency, campaigns that drained millions in self-funding, while alienating advertisers through partisan editorials such as his newspaper's vehement opposition to U.S. entry into World War I, labeling it a banker's war, and prompting boycotts that eroded revenues. The castle, still unfinished with plans for additional towers and wings, symbolized this overreach, its zoo expanding to include 50 species. Roaming 2,000 acres fenced at a cost of $250,000, where kangaroos and elephants grazed. Under the watchful eyes of keepers imported from Europe, a menagerie that entertained guests, but required ongoing subsidies amid rising feed costs, all while Hearst's personal life. Intertwined with the estate, his separation from wife Millicent in 1926, leading to Davy's semi-permanent residence in the celestial suite, a space of velvet-draped beds and French Gothic fireplaces. That offered respite from public scrutiny. The Great Crash of 1929 accelerated the unraveling as stock values plummeted, and Hearst's empire, burdened by $126 million in debts by 1935, faced circulation declines from competition with radio broadcasters forcing asset sales, including rare books and paintings. From the castle's vaults, yet the humanistic toll extended to employees, with newspaper staff enduring pay cuts. While San Simeon's construction halted intermittently, workers idled as funds dried up, exposing the illusions of Gilded Age permanence that Hearst had inherited and amplified. The Depression's grip tightened on Hearst's holdings in the early 1930s, transforming San Simeon from a bustling retreat into a quieter symbol of excess amid national hardship, where the lavish parties that once drew 50 guests weekly dwindled to intimate gatherings at the Esplanade's fountains still flowing, but the private theater screening fewer Hollywood premieres, its seats embroidered with Hearst's initials, now hosting somber discussions about restructuring debts that ballooned, from unpaid loans secured against his art collections and newspaper properties. Hearst, at 70 years old in 1933, resisted economies at first continuing to acquire pieces, like a 16th century Spanish choir stall for the refectory, even as his corporations teetered, but by 1935, with losses mounting to $15 million annually, from declining ad revenues, exacerbated by his paper's isolationist stance against Roosevelt's New Deal, which alienated government sympathizers. The illusions of invulnerability shattered, prompting the sale of prime real estate in New York and the liquidation of mining interests. Inherited from his father, funds diverted to stave off bankruptcy. While San Simeon's staff was reduced, gardeners tending fewer exotic plants, imported from Asia and Europe, their work preserving the Roman temple facade by the Neptune pool, now a maintenance of fading glory. This era exposed the interconnected themes of personal hubris and economic fragility as Hearst's companion, Marion Davies, sold her jewelry to cover shortfalls, a humanistic gesture amid the opulence, while Julia Morgan's final visits in 1937 oversaw incomplete projects, like the unbuilt North Wing, her correspondence revealing frustrations over halted payments that left artisans unpaid, echoing the broader Gilded Age reckoning, where fortunes built on speculation crumbled under regulatory reforms and market corrections, much like the Panic of 1893, that had tested George Hearst's resilience decades earlier. Amid these strains, the castle's role shifted toward a private sanctuary, with Hearst retreating to its hilltop isolation in 1937. After a forced reorganization by creditor who appointed a conservator to manage his affairs, selling off $30 million in assets, including Egyptian antiquities and European paintings from the estate's vaults, pieces once displayed. In the Gothic library, where leather-bound first editions, lined shelves crafted from Italian walnut now crated for auction. At venues like Gimbel's department store in New York, where crowds gawked at the dispersal of a tycoon's treasures, the atmosphere grew introspective. The indoor Roman pools, azure tiles, and gold-leaf statues, reflecting Hearst's solitary swims of a ritual that offered solace as his media empire contracted to half its size by 1940 with papers like the Chicago American folded, amid antitrust pressures and shifting reader preferences toward neutral reporting, yet the humanistic threads persisted in letters from former guests, recalling the castle's heyday, such as Cary Grant's anecdotes of tennis matches on courts, overlooking the Pacific, or Clark Gable's stories of dawn rides through the ranch's oak-dotted hills, experiences that humanized. The man behind the myth, a publisher whose early crusades against corruption in the 1890s had earned public admiration before sensationalism overshadowed his legacy. The financial nadir came in 1938, when Hearst, facing foreclosure threats, borrowed against life insurance policies to retain San Simeon, a move that preserved the estate, but underscored the Gilded Age's illusory permanence, where industrial barons, like Henry Flagler, had similarly overextended on palatial homes, only to see them repurposed or abandoned in economic downturns. By the 1940s, as World War II reshaped global priorities, Hearst's isolation at the castle deepened, his health declining, amid heart issues that confined him to the Celestial Suite, where views of the Santa Lucia Range provided a calm backdrop for dictating anti-interventionist editorials that further isolated his papers from mainstream sentiment, leading to boycotts and subscription cancellations. That compounded debts, yet the estate's infrastructure, reservoirs holding 5 million gallons, a power plant generating electricity for the remote site, sustained a reduced household, with Davies managing daily affairs in rooms filled with her film memorabilia. Interspersed among Renaissance artworks, a blend that highlighted the personal costs of ambition, the ultimate exposure of America's Gilded Age illusions, culminated in 1947, when Hearst, aged 88, left San Simeon for the last time, relocating to Beverly Hills, where he died in 1951, leaving the castle to his sons, who donated it to the state of California in 1957, transforming it into a public monument. That drew 700,000 visitors annually by the 1960s, its preserved chambers, offering immersive glimpses into an era where wealth's façade masked underlying vulnerabilities, the Twin Towers standing as enduring symbols of a dream that bankrupted its creator, while revealing the nation's own cycles of boom and bust. In the decades following its donation to California in 1957, Hearst Castle evolved into a state historic monument, its 165 rooms and 127 acres of gardens open to the public, through guided tours that began in 1958, drawing visitors who traverse the same winding road. Once reserved for elite invitees, now ascending by bus, to experience the layered historical context of a site preserved with original furnishings intact, from the 3,000-year-old Egyptian statues in the gardens to the Persian carpets in Casa Grande, a preservation effort funded by entrance fees that generated millions annually for the state park system by the 1970s. This transition exposed the Gilded Age's illusions on a broader scale as tourists from diverse backgrounds wandered the assembly room, where Hearst once hosted presidents like Calvin Coolidge. The space's 16th century French tapestries, an Italian cassone chess, now interpreted by docents, recounting the estate's construction costs, estimated at $10 million for buildings and another $30 million for art acquisitions, figures that highlighted the disparity between such extravagance and the widespread poverty of the 1930s, when millions queued for breadlines, while Hearst auctioned heirlooms to settle debts, a cause-and-effect chain that underscored how speculative wealth, untethered from sustainable practices, led to personal and societal reckonings, much like the broader economic reforms. Under the New Deal, That regulated banking and securities to curb the excesses of tycoons. The castle's enduring atmosphere, with fog rolling in from the Pacific, to shroud the terraces in mist and invites a calm reflection on humanistic themes as visitors learn of Julia Morgan's 28-year collaboration with Hearst, her 700-plus drawings, adapting to his evolving visions, including the integration of a 17th-century English paneled room into the Doge's suite, a process that humanized the architect's role as mediator between ambition and feasibility, her work ensuring the structure's seismic resilience through innovative engineering that withstood earthquakes, symbolizing a quiet triumph amid the financial chaos that forced her firm's closure in the late 1930s. The interconnected themes of cultural appropriation and economic overreach further illuminate the site's legacy as Hearst's collections amassed during Europe's post-World War I distress sales, including entire ceilings, from Italian villas dismantled and shipped via the Panama Canal, now serve as educational tools in museum exhibits at San Simeon, where curators detail the provenance of items like the 14th century Spanish retablo, in the refectory acquisitions that depleted funds, while enriching America's cultural landscape, yet at the cost of Hearst's empire, which by 1945 had shed most of its newspapers, leaving only a handful. Under family control, a contraction that mirrored the dissolution of other Gilded Age estates, like the Biltmore House maintained through tourism, but emblematic of an era when industrial fortunes funded architectural follies only to burden heirs with upkeep. In this immersive setting, the Neptune Pool's restoration in the 2010s, after decades of leaks and closures, revives the historical ambiance. For modern audiences, its Vermont marble statues and Algerian onyx steps, evoking the 1920s soirees where Davies entertained stars. Like Greta Garbo, yet the narrative shared on tours emphasize the humanistic toll, including the ranch hands who managed the 80,000-acre property. During lean years, their oral histories archived in local museums, recounting lean winters when zebras from the zoo were relocated to ease budgets, exposing the illusions of perpetual abundance. That defined Hearst's worldview, shaped by his mother's philanthropy that funded universities, while his own spending spiraled as preservation efforts continue with seismic retrofits in the 1990s, safeguarding the Twin Towers against coastal quakes. That the castle stands as a testament to America's cyclical prosperity, its public accessibility, democratizing the opulence once exclusive to the elite, or thereby fulfilling an unintended legacy, where bankruptcy's shadow reveals the fragility of Gilded Age dreams, inviting generations to ponder the balance between aspiration and restraint in a nation built on reinvention. The public stewardship of Hearst Castle, formalized through its designation as a California state park in 1958, initiated a new chapter in its history, where the estate's 56 bedrooms and 61 bathrooms, once privy to confidential dealings among media moguls and statesmen, now hosted educational programs that dissected the architectural innovations of Julia Morgan, whose use of reinforced concrete allowed for cantilevered balconies overlooking the 250-square-mile view shed, a technique that blended functionality with aesthetic grandeur, drawing parallels to the engineering feats of the era's skyscrapers in New York and Chicago, cities where Hearst's newspapers had fueled urban growth through boosterism and sensational coverage of events like the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Visitors, numbering over 100,000 in the first year alone, encountered the castle's thematic interconnections firsthand, tracing the cause and effect of Hearst's acquisitions. During the 1920s art market slumps in Europe, where economic devastation from the Treaty of Versailles enabled the purchase of items like the 13th century French Gothic fireplace in the billiard room shipped across the Atlantic at costs that contributed to the $50 million total empire-wide expenditures by 1930, figures that, when adjusted for inflation, underscore the scale of investment. rivaling federal infrastructure projects of the time. This immersion fosters a humanistic appreciation for the artisans involved, such as the Italian tile setters, who laid the 100,000 square feet of mosaics. In the Roman pool, their craftsmanship enduring through restorations that address salt air corrosion, revealing the labor-intensive reality. Behind the Gilded Age facade were immigrant workers, from the 1910s onward, built not just structures, but symbols of aspiration. In a nation grappling with income inequality, as evidenced by the 1929 stock market crash, that wiped out $30 billion in value overnight, precipitating the foreclosures and migrations. That contrasted sharply with San Simeon's insulated splendor. As interpretive exhibits expanded in the 1970s, incorporating audio tours narrated by historians, the narrative deepened to explore Hearst's media influence on American illusions, particularly through his paper's promotion of consumerism in the 1920s, with features on luxury automobiles and fashion that mirrored the castle's own excesses, such as the 19 fireplaces, fueled by wood from the ranch's forests or the private airfield constructed in 1928 for $100,000 to ferry guests like Amelia Earhart, whose visits highlighted the era's aviation boom. Yet also the financial strains, when maintenance costs mounted during the Depression, forcing Hearst to ground operations by 1934. The calm atmosphere of these tours, punctuated by the scent of blooming oleanders in the gardens designed by landscape architect Bruce Porter, invites reflection on interconnected economic themes as the estate's water system, pumping from wells 20 miles away, symbolized self-sufficiency that Hearst could no longer afford, leading to the 1937 court-ordered conservatorship under Joseph Willicum, his secretary, who orchestrated sales, $11 million in securities to appease creditors, a process that humanized Hearst's later years through preserved letters, expressing regret over unfinished wings, echoing the broader Gilded Age pattern, where figures like Andrew Carnegie divested fortunes into philanthropy to mitigate legacies of exploitation, though Hearst's efforts leaned toward cultural preservation, donating artifacts to museums, like the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in the 1940s. This period also illuminated the role of women in the estate's history, from Phoebe Apperson Hearst's initial ranch developments in the 1890s, funding schools and libraries, with mining dividends, to Marion Davies' post-Hearst philanthropy selling properties, to establish children's hospitals, gestures that softened the narrative of extravagance and exposed the personal vulnerabilities beneath the tycoon's public persona. In the 1980s and beyond, as seismic studies prompted reinforcements to the castle's foundations originally laid in 1919, with local sandstone, the site became a lens for examining America's evolving relationship with wealth, where annual maintenance costs, exceeding $5 million by 2000, highlighted the ongoing burden of preserving Gilded Age relics, much like the Vanderbilt's breakers in Rhode Island, sustained through nonprofit trusts, amid debates over tax policies favoring the affluent, policies Hearst himself had railed against in editorials. During his 1905 mayoral campaign in New York, positioning himself as a populist, despite his elite status, the immersive experience enhanced by virtual reality tours, introduced in the 2010s, allows visitors to navigate the celestial suite's opulent details, from the carved walnut bedstead to the views that inspired Hearst's isolationist views, while contextualizing the bankruptcy's ripple effects, including the 1941 release of Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, a film loosely based on Hearst's life that depicted a media baron's lonely demise. Amid collected treasures, a portrayal that incensed Hearst into unsuccessful suppression attempts, further draining resources and cementing his image as a cautionary tale of overreach, where the mansion's unfinished state at his departure in 1947, with planned tennis courts and additional guest quarters abandoned, mirrored the incomplete illusions of perpetual prosperity that defined the era, inviting contemporary audiences to draw parallels with modern economic bubbles, from the dot-com crash to housing crises in a humanistic dialogue that transcends time. The legacy of Hearst Castle endures as a cultural touchstone in the 21st century. Its status as a National Historic Landmark granted in 1976, affirming its architectural and historical significance, where ongoing conservation projects such as the 2000s restoration of the Casa del Mar guest house, with its ocean view bedrooms lined in 18th century French silk panels, ensure that the estate's layered narratives remain accessible, drawing over 600,000 visitors annually by 2019. Before pandemic interruptions, figures that reflect a public fascination, with the Gilded Age's opulent remnants now interpreted through multimedia exhibits in the visitor center that trace the cause and effect of Hearst's bankruptcy from the 1920s media boom. Fueled by yellow journalism's mass appeal, circulation soaring to 7 million daily readers, to the 1930s contractions, when ad revenues fell 40% amid the Depression, prompting the sale of 20,000 artworks and the dispersal of collections, to institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which acquired Roman sarcophagi, once housed in the castle's crypt-like storage. This evolution humanizes the site's story, as oral histories from descendants of ranch workers archived in digital formats by the 2010s recount daily life amid the grandeur, from herding cattle across the vast acreage to assisting in the unloading of crated antiquities. Arriving by rail from San Francisco's port, experiences that contrast the elite gatherings with the grounded realities of those who sustain the illusion, much like the broader American narrative, where immigrant labor built the railroads and factories that enriched tycoons only for economic downturns, to reveal systemic inequalities addressed through labor reforms in the 1930s. Interconnected themes of preservation and reflection permeate the castle's modern role as climate change initiatives in the 2020s. Adapt the garden's irrigation systems, originally engineered to draw from Pine Mountain Springs 3,000 feet away, to sustainable practices reducing water usage, while maintaining the terrace plantings of olive trees and citrus groves that Hearst imported in the 1910s, a landscape that symbolizes the environmental costs of ambition, with the ranch's 82,000 acres, now managed as a conservation area, supporting native wildlife, like Tule elk reintroduced in the 1970s, efforts that counterbalance the historical overreach evident in the unfinished celestial wing, where planned expansions for additional suites halted in 1937, left exposed beams as silent witnesses to financial collapse. The calm, immersive atmosphere invites visitors to contemplate humanistic parallels, such as Hearst's relationship with Julia Morgan, documented in her preserved ledgers, showing over 500 site visits. Between 1919 and 1947, her designs incorporating seismic braces. That proved vital. During the 2003 San Simeon earthquake, which caused minor damage, repaired at a cost of $3 million, underscoring the foresight amid chaos, while Marion Davies' memoirs, published posthumously, offer intimate glimpses into the private joys and strains, from costume balls in the assembly room to quiet evenings in the Della Robbia dining area, where blue and white ceramics from the 16th century Italy, framed meals prepared by a staff of 30, all funded by Davies' film earnings, that temporarily buoyed the estate during lean times. This exposure of Gilded Age illusions extends to educational programs, partnering with universities where scholars analyze Hearst's media tactics in shaping public opinion, such as his newspaper's role in promoting the 1898 war with Spain through exaggerated reports that increased U.S. territorial ambitions, a pattern of influence that waned as radio and television democratized information, contributing to the empire's decline and the castle's transformation into a public asset. As the site approaches its centennial of construction in 2019, commemorated with special tours, highlighting unrestored areas, like the wine cellar, stocked with pre-prohibition vintages, the narrative culminates in a broader examination of American resilience, where Hearst's bankruptcy finalized through asset reallocations, That preserved the core estate while liquidating peripheral holdings, mirrors national recoveries. From economic crises from the 1930s New Deal interventions that stabilized banking to post-2008 regulations, curbing speculative excesses, inviting a humanistic dialogue. On wealth's responsibilities as evidenced by the Hearst families, continued philanthropy through foundations, supporting journalism, education, echoing Phoebe Hearst's endowments. To the University of California in the 1890s, the mansion, once a private enclave of power, now stands as an open testament to the fragility of fortunes, its sun-drenched patios and echoing halls, fostering reflections on how individual ambitions intersect with societal shifts, ultimately exposing the illusions that propel progress, yet demand reckoning, a story etched into the California coastline, where ambition met its limits, reflecting on the enduring impact of Hearst Castle. Within the tapestry of American history, its transformation into an educational beacon in the late 20th century highlighted the nation's capacity for cultural redemption, where the excesses of one man's vision became a communal resource with the establishment of the Hearst Castle Preservation Foundation in 1975, channeling donations toward artifact conservation such as the meticulous cleaning of the 15th century Flemish tapestries in the assembly room, fabrics that had absorbed decades of coastal humidity, a process that paralleled the broader societal shift toward heritage tourism as an economic driver. In post-industrial California, generating over $100 million in regional revenue by the 1990s through visitor spending in nearby Cambria and San Luis Obispo. This evolution exposed the Gilded Age's illusions through interpretive lenses as exhibits detailed Hearst's art dealings with European dealers, like Joseph Duveen, who supplied Renaissance masterpieces at inflated prices during the 1920s, contributing to the debt spiral that necessitated the 1938 auction of 1,000 lots at Park Bernay Gallery's, sales that redistributed cultural treasures to public institutions and underscored the cause and effect of unchecked collecting, where Hearst's warehouses in the Bronx once held uncrated antiquities valued at $20 million, items later integrated into museums nationwide, humanizing the narrative by revealing the dealer's correspondences, pleading for payments. Amid the tycoon's liquidity crises, the immersive atmosphere enhanced by seasonal events like Christmas tours, recreating 1930s decorations with poinsettias and silver ornaments. From Hearst collections invites visitors to sense the humanistic warmth of past holidays when Davies hosted orphan children from Los Angeles. For ranch outings, gestures that soften the image of extravagance and connected personal stories. To the estate's grandeur, much like the oral testimonies of former butlers, archived in the 1980s, recounting midnight suppers in the refectory where mustard and ketchup bottles sat incongruously beside Ming Dynasty vases, blending high and low in a uniquely American fashion. The interconnected themes of legacy and accountability further unfold. In contemporary analyses, as scholars in the 2000s examined Hearst's influence on modern media landscapes, drawing parallels between his sensationalist headlines and today's digital echo chambers, where the castle's private telegraph office equipped with lines to his newsrooms facilitated real-time manipulations of public discourse, such as the 1934 campaigns against Upton Sinclair's gubernatorial bid. In California, editorials that mobilized voters but alienated advertisers, accelerating financial declines. That left San Simeon understaffed by 1940 with only a skeleton crew, maintaining the gardens. 2,000 rose bushes, this period's calm retrospection, fostered by digital archives, launched in the 2010s, allows access to Hearst's 50,000 letters revealing vulnerabilities, like his 1935 pleas to bankers for extensions, $80 million loans, documents that humanize the mogul as a product of his era's speculative fervor inherited from the Comstock Lode bonanzas that funded his father's Senate seat and his own early acquisitions, yet ultimately leading to the 1951 estate settlement, where sons inherited a diminished empire, prompting the donation that preserved the site for posterity. As environmental stewardship integrates into the castle's management with solar panels installed in the 2020s to power visitor facilities originally lit by a diesel generator from 1920, the narrative emphasizes sustainability. Amid historical excess, the ranch's vast lands, now hosting ecological research on native grasslands, countering the zoo's bygone era when imported animals strained resources, a shift that exposes the illusions of dominion over nature, paralleling economic overreach, inviting a humanistic contemplation of balance in an age of climate awareness, culminating in its role as a symbol of American ambition's double-edged sword. Hearst Castle stands resolute against the Pacific winds of its architecture, a frozen dialogue between past grandeur and present humility, where the unfinished elements, like the bare concrete of proposed expansions serve as metaphors for dreams curtailed by reality, a story that resonates through guided narratives, tracing the arc from George Hearst's 1865 purchase of the Piedra Blanca Rancho for $30,000 in gold coin, to William's bankruptcy-fueled departure, encapsulating the Gilded Age's rise and fall in stone and tile, ultimately offering an immersive testament to the human pursuit of legacy amid the inexorable tides of fortune. Through the lens of Hearst Castle's centennial reflections in 2019, the estate emerges as a profound artifact of American cultural evolution, its public programs expanding to include virtual reality reconstructions of 1920s gatherings in the Gothic dining hall, where digital overlays recreate the clink of crystal amid discussions between Hearst and figures like Franklin D. Roosevelt, who visited in 1933, amid tensions over New Deal policies that Hearst's papers lambasted as socialist overreach, a stance that further eroded his financial standing by alienating federal contracts and advertisers aligned with recovery efforts, illustrating the cause and effect interplay between political editorializing and economic fallout as circulation dipped below 5 million by 1935, prompting the closure of unprofitable outlets like the Washington Times. This modern engagement humanizes the historical figures with interactive exhibits detailing Julia Morgan's engineering prowess in designing the hilltop water towers that stored 1 million gallons, structures that enabled the fountain's perpetual flow. Despite the region's droughts, a feat accomplished. Through pipelines spanning miles of rugged terrain, her contributions now celebrated in annual lectures at the Visitor Center, where architects study her blueprints, preserved in climate-controlled vaults, revealing the humanistic dedication of a woman who balanced over 700 commissions while prioritizing San Simeon's demands, often traveling by train from her San Francisco office to oversee adjustments like the repositioning of the Roman pool's alabaster lamps imported from Carrara quarries. The interconnected themes of adaptation and legacy persist as the castle's role in film history, serving as inspiration for Xanadu in Citizen Kane, with its vast halls mirroring the fictional tycoon's isolation, fuels ongoing scholarly debates documented in conferences held on site in the 2000s, where experts analyze how Wells' 1941 portrayal amplified public perceptions of Hearst's downfall, contributing to a cultural narrative that exposed Gilded Age illusions, much like Sinclair Lewis's novels. Critique the era's materialism, yet Hearst's countermeasures, including bans on RKO films in his theaters, only heightened the film's notoriety and deepened his reclusion at the estate. In the realm of environmental and cultural stewardship, the 2020s have seen Hearst Castle integrate sustainable tourism practices with electric shuttles replacing diesel buses. On the Ascent Road, built in 1921 at a cost of $500,000, a pathway engineered with hairpin turns to navigate the 1,650-foot elevation gain, now monitored by sensors, tracking erosion from increased foot traffic, efforts that preserve the site's integrity while addressing the carbon footprint of 750,000 annual visitors by 2023, figures that underscore the economic boon to San Luis Obispo County, generating $200 million in tourism revenue and supporting 2,000 jobs, a far cry from the 1930s, when local economies suffered, as Hearst's payroll shrank, idling craftsmen who had sculpted the Esplanade statuary from Italian travertine. This shift illuminates the humanistic resilience of communities tied to such landmarks as oral histories from descendants of the original vaqueros Mexican cowboys who managed the ranch since its 1865 acquisition, detailed generational shifts from cattle herding to guiding tours, their stories archived in multimedia displays that connect personal lineages to the broader American West narrative, where Spanish land grants evolved into industrial playgrounds, only to revert to public domains, exposing the illusions of private empire building in a democracy increasingly attuned to equity. The calm, immersive quality of these experiences, from twilight tours under the bell tower silhouettes to conservation workshops in the gardens, planted with 6,000 trees, fosters a deeper understanding of Hearst's complex persona, a man whose early journalistic exposés on corporate monopolies in the 1890s positioned him as a reformer before power's corrupting influence led to his own monopolistic practices, a trajectory that bankrupted his visions, but enriched historical discourse, leaving the mansion as an enduring symbol where Gilded Age aspirations meet their sobering realities. As Hearst Castle navigates the complexities of the digital age, its interpretive strategies have embraced technology to deepen public engagement with augmented reality apps launched in 2022, allowing virtual explorations of restricted areas like the private vaults beneath Casa Grande, where unexhibited artifacts from Hearst's collections such as ancient Greek amphorae acquired in the 1920s from Athenian dealers during Greece's post-war economic struggles, are digitally reconstructed and providing immersive insights into the acquisition processes that fueled the estate's growth, while contributing to the $126 million debt by 1937, a burden that forced the liquidation of similar pieces to creditors, including J.P. Morgan's banking interests, illustrating the cause and effect dynamics of cultural patronage, intertwined with financial speculation, where Hearst's media revenues, once bolstered by syndication deals, reaching 20 million readers, faltered under competition from emerging broadcasters like CBS, leading to a humanistic portrayal in modern documentaries that highlight the personal correspondences between Hearst and his editors, letters preserved in university archives, revealing anxieties over payrolls during the estate's leanest years. This technological integration humanizes the historical atmosphere as users on mobile devices overlay 1930s photographs onto current views from the Esplanade, recreating scenes of guests like Winston Churchill strolling the pergolas in 1929, discussions on international affairs amid the scent of jasmine vines imported from the Mediterranean, a setting that contrasted the global economic turmoil with the castle's isolated splendor, yet ultimately exposed the illusions of autonomy when wartime rationing in the 1940s curtailed supplies, idling the private generator and dimming the chandeliers. Crafted from Bohemian crystal in the main salon, the site's educational outreach extends to partnerships with institutions like the Getty Museum, where joint exhibitions in the 2010s displayed loaned items from San Simeon, such as 16th century Venetian glassware, once used in the Della Robbia room, for informal teas, artifacts that narrate the broader theme of transatlantic cultural exchange, during the interwar period when Hearst capitalized on Europe's distress to amass collections at bargain prices, a strategy that inflated his assets on paper but proved illiquid. During the Depression, prompting the 1939 dispersal of over 10,000 items through department store sales that democratized access to fine art for middle-class buyers, a shift that humanized the tycoon's legacy by redistributing wealth in unintended ways, echoing the philanthropic impulses of his mother Phoebe, who in the 1890s endowed anthropological museums with artifacts from global expeditions funded by the families, mining dividends. In this calm reflection, the castle's enduring presence fosters interconnected understandings of economic cycles as climate-resilient landscaping adaptations. In the 2020s, replacing water-intensive lawns with native chaparral species address the environmental legacies of Hearst's terraforming, which reshaped the hillside with 500,000 tons of imported soil to create the gardens, as an effort requiring hundreds of laborers. During the 1920s boom, their stories now integrated into audio guides that recount the diverse origins of the workforce, from Italian stonemasons to Chinese gardeners, exposing the multicultural fabric underpinning Gilded Age monuments where illusions of singular genius masked collective human endeavor. As the mansion that bankrupted its creator continues to inspire, its towers silhouetted against the horizon serve as a timeless reminder of America's capacity for reinvention, transforming personal folly into public enlightenment on the perils and promises of ambition. In the quiet expanse of Hearst Castle's enduring presence, the narrative of William Randolph Hearst's life and legacy converges with the broader currents of American history, where the mansion's public accessibility since 1958 has served as a democratizing force, allowing school groups from across the state to wander the same marble halls, once trod by luminaries, their tours guided by rangers, who recount the architectural feats of integrating a 15th century Italian refectory table into the dining space, a piece shipped in sections and reassembled under Julia Morgan's supervision, her designs ensuring the room's acoustic warmth for conversations that spanned politics and cinema, yet now echoing with educational dialogues on economic disparity as exhibits contrast the castle's $10 million construction costs with the average American wage of $1,200 annually in the 1930s, exposing the Gilded Age's stark divides that Hearst's own crusades against trusts in the 1890s had sought to address before his empire mirrored those very monopolies. This humanistic lens reveals the personal intersections, such as Hearst's correspondence with artists like Frederick Remington, whose illustrations amplified his newspaper's warmongering in 1898, tactics that built fortunes but sowed seeds of financial instability when public backlash. During the 1930s, isolationist debates led to advertiser withdrawals, culminating in the conservatorship that preserved San Simeon by sacrificing other assets, a process documented in court records, showing $50 million in art appraisals used as collateral of figures that humanize the tycoon's fall from a position where he once commanded a private army of reporters to one of negotiated surrenders. With bankers, the castle's role in contemporary cultural memory further illuminates interconnected themes of preservation and critique, as its inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places in 1972 prompted federal grants for restorations, including the 1990s repointing of the façade's Utah limestone to combat erosion from Pacific storms, efforts that maintain the site's atmospheric integrity while adapting to modern challenges like accessibility ramps added in the 2000s for wheelchair users, ensuring the estate's grandeur is inclusive, a far remove from its exclusive origins, where guest lists were vetted by Hearst himself, often excluding rivals like Joseph Pulitzer, whose competing papers had fueled the circulation wars of the 1890s. That expanded Hearst's reach, but inflated operational costs, leading to the 1920s over-leveraging. In this calm immersion visitors encounter, the Roman pools restored mosaics, their blue and gold patterns, evoking the Byzantine influences Hearst admired during European tours. Funded by mining royalties, yet the narrative shared emphasized the labor of Venetian craftsmen who laid the tiles in 1924, their work interrupted by budget shortfalls that mirrored national unemployment spikes, humanizing the era's economic tides through archived payroll ledgers showing wage reductions for the 60-person staff by 1932. As the mansion that bankrupted its creator stands as a monument to exposed illusions its story weaves through America's ongoing dialogue on wealth and power, from the Gilded Age's unregulated booms to the regulatory frameworks that followed, offering a layered reflection on how individual ambitions, when unchecked, reveal societal vulnerabilities, ultimately transforming a private folly into a public parable etched into the California landscape.